Whispers from the ward. Nina had worked as a nurse at the Old Grey Pines rest home for nearly 5 years. The building itself had a history, a sprawling, creaky institution built in the early 1900s. Over time, the decor had become a mixture of faded elegance and deteriorating decay, with long hallways that seemed to stretch on forever and rooms that felt more like forgotten chambers of the past than modern healthcare facilities. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, and the residents were often too lost in their memories to notice how much the world outside had changed. But it wasn't just the patients that made the hospital unsettling. It was the atmosphere. A thick, oppressive sense of something other hanging in the air, like a shadow, too close to be ignored. Nina had heard the rumors when she first started, strange noises in the dead of night, doors opening and closing by themselves, glimpses of figures in the corners of her vision. But she was a nurse, a pragmatist. She didn't have time for superstition or ghost stories. Not when she was busy with critical care, administering medication, or comforting families. It wasn't until she started working the late shift, after everyone else had gone home, that she began to notice the peculiarities herself. One night, during her usual rounds, she heard it, a soft whispering. It wasn't loud enough to be called shouting or even talking, but it was distinct, like the hushed voices of several people having a conversation just out of reach. At first, she assumed it was just the wind, or maybe the old building's pipes, groaning and stretching. But as she made her way down the corridor, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. "Help me, please, it's too late." The words chilled her spine, but she shrugged it off, attributing it to stress or fatigue. But as she entered room 206 to check on Mrs. Carver, a long-time resident who'd been bedridden for years, she found something that unsettled her even more. Mrs. Carver's eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling with an intensity Nina had never seen before. And yet, the woman had not made a sound. Nina moved closer, instinctively checking her vitals, but when her hand brushed the woman's, Mrs. Carver's gnarled fingers twitched ever so slightly, and her lips trembled. "Are they here?" The elderly woman whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Who, Mrs. Carver? Who is here?" Nina asked, her voice soft, trying to reassure her. Mrs. Carver's eyes snapped toward Nina, and for a moment, the nurse saw a flash of terror in the woman's face. "They never leave. They are always here, waiting. The ones who didn't make it." The room suddenly felt colder. A cold draft slipped through the cracks of the window, and Nina felt goosebumps rise on her arms. But when she checked the window, it was sealed shut. The whispering that had been lingering in the air now seemed to grow louder, almost as if the walls themselves were alive with a collective sigh. "Do you hear that?" Mrs. Carver asked, her voice thin and shaky. Nina froze. The whispers weren't in her head,